Welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've got Brian Batko on today. Alex Highsmith spoke to us. While TJ Watt hasn't been to OTAs and there's that question looming on his contract, he gave us an interesting hint about what could be happening there. We'll talk about that, Joey Porter, Darius Slay, and the continued wait for Aaron Rodgers, all here on the Friday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Brian Batko. We're your Steelers writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. They not only will they help you when you're injured in an accident, they'll also help you with workers' compensation. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Brian, we got a chance to talk to Alex Highsmith on Thursday, day 3 of Steelers OTAs. And while TJ Watt has not been at practice just yet, and there's big questions looming as he's in the last year of his current contract, and there's JJ Watt, his older brother, going on Pat McAfee and making comments about who should get paid, and the edge rushers getting paid on time and things like that. Alex Highsmith seemed very confident, and I mean, literally, he used the words "very confident" when asked about if a deal would get done with Watt. Said that the two of them have been talking all offseason. Also talked about how they're excited how next week to start getting into how they're going to be switching sides a little bit more often. So maybe a veiled hint that TJ Watt might actually arrive at OTAs. Who knows? But I know there's a lot of people out there that are speculating that this could be a really big deal and a really big problem. But I continue to get the sense that it's not really. TJ Watt's taking his time because he can take his time because he's TJ Watt. Troy Polamalu used to skip OTAs. This could be a non-story relative by the time the season really gets going.
Yeah, I mean, I think even last year, I don't know if TJ was there for everything. We're not really in the business of attendance taking for optional organized team activities. It's not mandatory, and the only reason it is more of a story this year is because there isn't exactly clarity yet on whether the Steelers are going to lock up TJ long term. I still happen to think they will. I think this is sort of the natural do-si-do that you have to do sometimes. And, I don't think it'll be as delayed as it was the first time around for TJ. Now, granted, that was his first big money deal in the NFL. So maybe there were some different wrinkles to be ironed out there. But you look back at last year, yes, the Steelers waited a while on Pat Freiermuth and Cam Heyward's new deals, but both those guys were practicing in the meantime. Yeah. So that tells me they had pretty good assurances that it was going to get done. Before that, Alex Highsmith, I want to say he got inked right before training camp. And, even going back to Minkah Fitzpatrick in 2022, that got done between mandatory minicamp and training camp. So those guys didn't have to deal with any sort of, do I hold in? What am I doing in Latrobe? So I could see it, really going any which way there. But ultimately, I think it won't be too dramatic and it'll get done. Whether it's JJ Watt, speaking pseudo publicly about this, like not really sharing everything he knows. Maybe that applies a little bit of pressure. The whole not being at OTAs, maybe that applies a little bit of pressure, but I don't think too much leverage is going to be needed here from either side.
Yeah, that's the thing. The Steelers, no, it's all right. The Steelers want him there. He wants to be there. He's always said he wants to be a Steelers for life. He wants to play under Mike Tomlin, throughout the rest of his career. I really do think there's going to be a deal sooner rather than later. Or, like you said, even if there's a hold in going into training camp, people talk about, oh, that's going to hold everything back. The year that TJ Watt had the hold in 2021 was the year that he tied Michael Strahan's sack record. So, let's put a pin in that for now. But I think the other thing that's going to be interesting, Alex Highsmith, I asked him because TJ Watt acknowledged at the end of the season, hey, teams had schemes to slow him down. They figured out what him and Highsmith like to do, and that he talked about being willing to move sides around. And Alex Highsmith said that he's open to doing that and that they're going to be starting to work on that next week when OTAs continue. And so when he said we're going to start to work on that, I mean, it kind of makes me wonder, would that mean that TJ Watt's there next week? And that could certainly, change a lot of these conversations as well. But for me, Brian, I just think that this is another sign the Steelers are going to get their business done. They're going to keep one of their superstars, but they do need to change things about how their superstar, how they use their superstar to try to free him up and counter what teams are trying to do to negate him.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, Alex Highsmith bringing up those sorts of potential tweaks to the defense like that's probably a pro TJ thing, because that's almost like, hey, why don't you guys just, get him this offer or give him this extra boost that he wants, and that way we can get him here and we can start figuring out how to do some of this. So, I'm sure he's on his teammates' side, and in whatever this, becomes contract dispute wise. And I just think the natural give and take, push and pull here is, and this is something else JJ Watt talked about. He didn't want to get into specifics on TJ's situation, but he talked broadly about teams paying players, more in advance and taking care of guys, and basically not having to play catch up once the market gets reset, which does make sense from a business standpoint. But of course, players, they're going to want their financial security locked in sooner, whereas teams are naturally going to want more data points at their disposal before they make these big decisions. So that's why these things do get dragged out at times. But yeah, Chris, I mean, it could mean that. It could mean Nick Herbig and Jack Sawyer are going to move to some different spots than they've lined up in so far at OTAs. And obviously Alex Highsmith himself. So I don't know. I mean, I do think that's certainly a subplot to watch going into this next season, because one of the biggest reasons why there is any sort of, debate or discussion among Steelers fans what to do with paying TJ Watt is his numbers did drop a little bit last season, and his production did drop. And if they can find ways to combat some of the attention he gets from opposing offenses, then yeah, maybe you see those sack numbers shoot right back up, and whatever you end up paying him looks like it's a good deal for all sides.
And here's another factor too. What if you free him up? What if they do more swapping? And by the way, I wrote about this in the middle of the season, did a whole film study, because at the end of the Giants game, when it was close and the Steelers needed a big play, they flipped him around just a few times, I think 4 or 5 times that game. And then towards the end of the game on a big third down, TJ Watt stayed on his normal side, and the Giants just forgot to communicate, double team him, because they were like, wait a minute, he's been moving, we're not sure. And even just that little bit caused a miscommunication, let him get a one-on-one, and then he was able to sack Daniel Jones and win the game ultimately for the Steelers on that play. Even that little bit of switching was able to help them then. And I went over the numbers back in the middle part of the season, but they never really went back to it that often. And I thought that was the start of something that could change. So now it's going to be about making it regular. But here's another aspect to this, Brian. This may not lead to TJ Watt getting up to 20 sacks again, but it may lead to more chaos within the entire Steelers defense. If the windfall is that, hey, TJ might still just get 12, 13, 14 sacks, but now Alex Highsmith's getting double-digit sacks. Cam Heyward's getting back to getting double-digit sacks. Maybe Keanu Benton gets 5 or 6, and then Derek Harmon gets 4. So that if there's that collective pressure, and Herbig and other guys are getting it as well, that all counts in the Steelers' favor. And if flopping them around is a piece of that, that is a big boost.
Yeah, it could open up some one-on-one matchups on the interior. It could open up some of those, quick pressures from those defensive linemen that you just mentioned. Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately why you pay a guy the big bucks. You want to have 4 hands and 2 sets of eyes paying attention to TJ Watt at all times, because then everybody else is at a man advantage there, facing, whether it's the Bengals or the Browns or, the Ravens are kind of their own set of problems to manage when you face them. But yeah, I mean, I still think he's a critical piece of this team for everything that you just mentioned there. I don't think, even as he's, past the 30-year threshold and that dreaded number, I don't think he's really any less adept at, beating a tackle one-on-one than he was. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that. He's probably a little less adept than he was 2 or 3 years ago, when he was literally setting the NFL sack record, but I still think he's, top 3 to 5 edge rushers in the league, whether it's a, D end with his hand in the ground or a stand-up guy like he is.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the cornerback situation. We got to talk to Darius Slay and Joey Porter Jr. and their connection that they're working to build. That's next here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Also, continuing to watch on the Aaron Rodgers situation. Will that come to a head at any point? All here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter, Brian Batko, stick with us. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates, who also help with workers' compensation. If you've ever been hurt on the job, you need to know who decides when you're better, who decides when your treatment's over, and who decides when your benefits are over. And this might surprise you. It's the insurance company's doctors. They won't be on your side. You need someone on your side. That's Edgar Snyder Associates. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR because they'll fight for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. Call again, Edgar Snyder Associates at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's talk about the cornerback situation here, and the thing that the Steelers got going on with Joey Porter Jr. and Darius Slay. Darius Slay coming into his 13th year of the NFL. He's coming off a Super Bowl season with the Eagles. He tied Denzel Ward with the most forced incompletions last year. He joins Joey Porter Jr., who literally, when I talked to both of them this week, Joey Porter Jr. talked about watching Darius Slay in his all-pro season back in 2017 when he was a first-team all-pro cornerback with the Lions. And Joey Porter Jr. was a freshman in high school when that happened. And so now here they are. And Joey Porter even said, hey, like, I got to stop telling these guys that I used to watch them when I was in high school because then it just makes them feel old. And he referenced he's still good friends with Patrick Peterson, still good friends with Dante Jackson, and now he looks forward to being good friends with Darius Slay. But to me, a big part of this puzzle is trying to get Joey Porter Jr. to be the long-term CB1, however it's going to be. And I think Slay can be another mentor along that path, but also another good partner along that path. And who knows, maybe even the best partner that Joey Porter's had yet in his career.
Yeah, maybe. I think Patrick Peterson was on his last legs, and Dante Jackson, tailed off at the end of last season. I don't know if he's on his last legs. We'll find out with the Chargers, but Patrick Peterson never played again. I think he's basically, for all intents and purposes, retired now. He's playing a lot of golf, that's for sure. Dante Jackson not retired, but that was kind of the rub with him when the Steelers acquired him from Carolina. Was you got a lot of people who cover or watch the Panthers saying, yeah, I mean he's lost a step for sure. Darius Slay, I mean he's not going to be his 27 or 28-year-old self, but does he still have the instincts? Does he still have the burst to kind of close on a pass? When he has a good idea of where the ball is going, that I think is what the Steelers are banking on. And, that mentorship for Joey Porter Jr. is, to me, an added bonus. It's never the sole reason why you sign a guy at that position or at the receiver position or at quarterback. But, I think Slay's personality and the motivation that he's bringing here, the experience that he's bringing here, having been to the top of the mountain last year with the Eagles, that should serve well for a young player in Joey Porter Jr. who is, still trying to figure out some of the finer points of playing this position at this level. I mean, I know he talked on Wednesday about going back and watching some of his issues last year and some of the flags thrown on him. And it wasn't necessarily a case of guys are just running way past him, flying by him, and he has to grab. He thinks it's more technical or nuanced in nature. That may be. And, I know that penalty number for Joey Porter Jr. is kind of inflated by the Bengals game and maybe one other game, but I don't necessarily look at that as a good thing. I mean, I think there's a lot of corners, the reigning defensive player of the year, probably in this camp, Pat Surtain II, who, maybe he's good for a DPI or penalty or two a game, but they're usually well-timed and they're usually born of playing a physical style at the position where you get away with locking down a receiver a lot more than you get whistled for doing something against the rules. So Joey still needs to, thread that needle and make sure that he is not jeopardizing the Steelers defense by having essentially an implosion type of game where he just, can't figure out that particular officiating crew or how it's getting called that day.
No, I think that's the thing, is that he has to trust his work. The more and more I watch Joey Porter Jr., so many of his penalties come when he's done the right things leading up to a play. He's been in position, and then it's just like when the ball
can't resist. He's like, I gotta
right. Like it's like I've anticipated the inside break. I've put myself in position. I'm in between the quarterback and the receiver as the ball's coming here. But instead of playing the ball, I grab the receiver. And it's just like a bad instinct that he has to kick. And maybe that's why they brought in Gerald Alexander, the Steelers' secondary coach. Now, he used to be their assistant secondary coach. He moved to the Raiders as their safeties coach last year. They brought him back. Gerald Alexander, much more vocal of a coach than Grady Brown was, at least on the field visibly when you see him coach. And it's a guy who's going to work hard to get that out of him. If that is the change that Joey Porter Jr. makes this season, that could go a long way to making him the cornerback that they're trying to have be a pillar of their defense for years to come. Because again, he has all those other parts down. If he gets the ball placement down and takes away, improves his ball instincts and takes away those penalties, which again, Darius Slay, very good at doing. Again, led the NFL in forced incompletions, tied with Denzel Ward with 17 on the year, according to Pro Football Focus. And about 10 of those came from backed off zone coverage, where a lot of anticipation and properly playing the ball and knowing how to interact with guys and anticipate different routes play into the factor there. If Darius Slay can rub off on Joey Porter Jr. there, and Gerald Alexander, Terrell Austin, if they can get Porter to take that step forward this year, it could go a long way to him being that guy. And if he is that guy for the Steelers finally can start to build back having a cornerback room that's more scary than not, because I've said this for a while now. Minkah Fitzpatrick's best years as a safety was when he had Joe Hayden and Steven Nelson on the outside, and teams didn't want to pick on those guys because they couldn't pick on those guys. And that led to more passes over the middle, more turnovers there. If Porter can be that guy, that's one step in the right direction.
Yeah, and Joey's development will help Slay too. I mean, that'll help. We know that in a perfect world for the Steelers, they've got Joey Porter Jr. shadowing the opposing team's top receiver and taking him away in one-on-one matchups. And then you can give 34-year-old Darius Slay a little bit more schematic help on that side. And, everybody wins.
Certainly will be big questions about the Steelers cornerback room moving forward, but we got to take a quick break. When we come back, I know we said we were going to talk Aaron Rodgers, but there was a big trade rumor floated out by Adam Schefter, Field Yates, and the ESPN crew. They're talking about the Steelers potentially acquiring Dolphins tight end Jonnu Smith. We'll talk about that rumor next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind? Step into something more than just a workout. Welcome to the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training. It's about living the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program by a third-degree black belt instructor who builds confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn about the exclusive 3-month introductory package today. That's UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. We literally had to change mid-show what we were talking about because some news came out from the ESPN side of things about trade discussions. Now, let's talk about those trade discussions. Are this literally happening real time right now? And who knows? Maybe by the time that you're hearing or watching this episode, it's happened or it's been settled that it won't happen. But Adam Schefter reports, quote, the Dolphins have had trade discussions with the Pittsburgh Steelers about their lone Pro Bowl selection last year, tight end Jonnu Smith, per league sources. Those talks came after Smith expressed interest in reworking his deal that's scheduled to pay him $4.8 million this season. With Smith seeking a new contract, Miami sought a trade partner. Last season, Smith set the franchise record for a tight end with receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. Smith's preference per sources is to stay in Miami under a reworked deal. Also it pointing out, Field Yates says, quote, Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith loves Jonnu Smith. He had him as a young player in Tennessee and again with Atlanta. Brian, here's the thing about this. We've been talking about the Steelers acquiring a wide receiver ever since the George Pickens trade. And I mean, all last year, too, before they traded for DK Metcalf this year. Is the answer just to keep loading up a tight end? Because I feel like they have enough tight ends. They've got Pat Freiermuth. They've got Darnell Washington. They've got Connor Heyward, the DJ Thomas Jones kid. They got guys lined up. So, Jonnu Smith, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, all due respect to DJ Thomas Jones, undrafted free agent, good story. I'm sure he's working hard, but like Jonnu Smith had almost 900 receiving yards last year.
I hear that, but you got Pat Freiermuth. Like, do you need to have do you need to have 2 star tight ends instead of adding at wide receiver, or is this just an opportunity, I guess, that the Steelers see here?
So I think it's partly that, and I mean, we could get into the nitty gritty of like, okay, is it really like, you're playing 12 personnel with Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith, but you've really got 2 guys right there who are sort of, they're like a 1.5 because they're such good pass catchers at that position. We could get into all of that, but I think the biggest thing is this will be almost comical from an Arthur Smith perspective.
Oh, yeah.
If the Steelers go out and get the player that he was probably most tied. The Falcons traded for him when he was in Atlanta as the head coach. And, people that follow that team or that follow fantasy football were really anti-Arthur Smith because that was a group that had Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan Robinson. And Jonnu Smith is catching a bunch of passes and playing a ton of snaps and getting a bunch of targets. I'll be honest, I didn't realize his numbers were so good last year and that he was a Pro Bowler. With Tua Tagovailoa and Mike McDaniel, but I don't know. This would be the most obvious, move to date of like Arthur Smith. For all he says, he doesn't have any say in the roster.
He absolutely does. Do not tell me he does not.
Yeah, I mean, he had Michael Pruitt here last year, who was his guy from various stops in Tennessee and Atlanta. Van Jefferson was part of his crew in Atlanta. Scotty Miller was there for a minute. And we all know the OG Cordero Patterson is still on the roster.
Yep, I forgot about Cordero.
So, I haven't seen Cordero do any interviews from OTAs or anything like that, or seen him in any photos or any clips, but he's still on the roster. And yes, this would just be hilarious if the Steelers go and trade for Jonnu Smith. From that standpoint, from an X's and O's and football standpoint, he's still only 29. He's going to turn 30 in August. He's versatile. This would probably spell the end of Connor Heyward unless he's really just a 4th tight end, getting special team snaps. It would probably spell a major decrease in the involvement of Darnell Washington in the passing game. And sort of to what we were talking about at the beginning is like, I mean, you're not really going to have to worry much about who's the number 2 receiver because, you can just run 3 different guys out there because you're not going to ever see receivers 3, 4, and 5. That's for sure.
No, that's where I'm at. It's just if you're getting this opportunity here to add a serious tight, because Jonnu Smith is a tight end 1, like in my opinion, like he's a guy that you bring in to be that guy. But Pat Freiermuth is already your tight end 1. So like, here's the other thing: like, are you bringing him in for a rental? Are you giving him a 2-year, 3-year extension? Like, what's the deal here? Because by the way, this is the last year of his contract before he starts hitting void years on his deal with the Dolphins. So maybe that's part of what he's trying to work out there. And again, this might not even happen. Jonnu Smith says he'd prefer to stay in Miami and stick that out. But if the Steelers were to acquire him, I really wonder what this does for the offense, because if it just means, hey, we're just running a lot of 12 personnel where it's a double tight end, moving around, and like you said, the kind of like, hey, there's 2 tight ends on the field, but one's motioning out into the slot or one's lining up out wide just because they can. Yeah. I can see that, but this seems. I think your point about Arthur Smith having a lot more control than he lets on is a very, very that's a lot of foresight that you have there. A lot of, I think it's a very good point to be made here because Jonnu Smith, like you said, was brought to the Falcons from the Titans when Arthur Smith took over in Atlanta.
From the Patriots, actually. Yeah.
From the Patriots, right.
New England signed him to a deal. Remember, they were spending all that money in free agency. I think they signed him and Hunter Henry. Mm-hmm. And it was like, okay, Belichick, whatever. And then, it didn't last too long for Smith in New England. And then, Arthur Smith goes and reunites with him in Atlanta.
Yeah, so this would be a very interesting move, to say the least, about the Steelers and what they're trying to do with their offense. 12 personnel just all day with 2 tight ends, 2 receivers, and 1 running back. It could work, if the Steelers are able to use these guys as dangerous receiving threats, but also good blocking threats to get things going. But it certainly will put the ultimate Arthur Smith offense to the test, because this would be him getting, they've invested heavily in an offensive line. They invested a 3rd round pick in a young running back this year. And now they've given him all the tight ends, because Darnell Washington, I think, is a solid tight end too. Like he blocks well. He can be a threat for you in the red zone, maybe throw the ball actually to him in the red zone a little bit more. And Pat Freiermuth, I think, has been underutilized at the tight end position. But that's kind of my other thought here, Brian. Like, we still haven't seen Pat Freiermuth blow up yet for the Steelers. And part of that's because of, he had Matt Canada, Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, all those things. Last year, Russell Wilson didn't throw over the middle a whole lot. Like, if you haven't been using the tight end that you're paying the money to be tight end 1, does it make sense to go get tight end 2, who's also like at that kind of caliber?
Yeah, I mean, hey, Pat Freiermuth, he'll get his salary either way, but I do kind of wonder too, if you're in his shoes, it'd be like, really? I mean, I probably didn't get the ball enough last year as it is, and right. I never complained. I never griped about it. I just went out there and, did my job, ran my routes, whether I got 0 targets or whatever. But now you're going to bring in another mouth to feed at my position, and someone who did go to the Pro Bowl last year. Like, what did I do? Would really, Arthur? So, this is a little strange, but maybe nothing will come of it. Maybe this will, be the nice little leverage play that Jonnu Smith needs to get what he wants in Miami. It's not a crazy cap number for him this year. I mean, $4.64 million, and then, like you said, it'd be on the hook for a void year next year for $1.65, according to overthecap.com. But yeah, like, I think what you've been getting at is, like, would it just be a waste of money? Would just be throwing money at something that you really don't need right now? I think that's a fair question to ask.
That's certainly my question. We will see how that plays out here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Stay tuned for all the updates by going to post-gazette.com. Find us here on the North Shore Drive podcast every day, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. From Chris Carter and Brian Batko, thanks for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast. We'll see you Monday. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a deal to speak of. Maybe there'll be a few things to speak about here as far as developments on the Steelers roster. Keep it here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.